When was the last time you heard anyone talk about Indian motorcycle with the energy the brand used to create? Almost never. And that says everything. There was a time when this name dominated American roads alongside Harley-Davidson, racing across dirt tracks and highways from 1901 to 1953. Indian built the motorcycles that defined American freedom, won championships, and carried riders through 2 world wars. The momentum was real, and the brand rode it for over half a century. But momentum only lasts if you can survive financial collapse, manufacturing disasters, and complete extinction. Quality control failures plagued every revival attempt. Multiple ownership changes destroyed continuity. The original company died entirely in 1953, taking decades of engineering expertise with it. The name stayed familiar through countless resurrection attempts, but the influence faded. So today's question is simple. How did Indian Motorcycle build a 50-year empire? And what pushed America's oldest motorcycle company into complete extinction? The story begins in Springfield, Massachusetts, at the turn of the 20th century. George Hendy wasn't looking to make history. He was simply a former bicycle racing champion looking for his next venture. Oscar Hedstrom was an engineer with a passion for engines. Their partnership would create something revolutionary, America's first motorcycle manufacturing company. Hendy had already established himself in the bicycle industry with his Silver King and Silver Queen bicycles. When he witnessed early motorcycle prototypes at races, he immediately recognized their potential. What he needed was someone who could build them reliably. Hedstrom was that person, a Swedish immigrant with mechanical genius who had already been experimenting with motorized bicycles in his own workshop. Their 1901 prototype was groundbreaking. While most early motorcycles were essentially bicycles with engines awkwardly attached, Hedstrom designed an integrated machine from the ground up. His innovations solved problems that had plagued early motorcycles. The chain drive system provided reliable power transfer, automatic intake valves eliminated constant adjustment needs, and the ignition system started consistently, something European models struggled with. The prototype wasn't just functional, it was fast. In speed tests at the Springfield racetrack, Hedstrom's machine reached 25 miles per hour with ease. Impressive for the era. Word spread quickly in the tight-knit racing community. Orders began arriving before they had even established proper manufacturing facilities. Unlike many startups of the era that announced big plans but delivered little, Hendy and Hedstrom moved with remarkable speed. By 1902, they had officially incorporated as the Hendy Manufacturing Company and sold 143 motorcycles, each one hand-built and thoroughly tested. By 1904, that number jumped to over 500. The company outgrew 3 facilities in quick succession, finally settling into a massive factory complex in Springfield that would become their headquarters for decades. As America entered the 19-teens, Indian Motorcycle was not just succeeding, it was dominating. The company controlled an astonishing 42% of the American motorcycle market, producing motorcycles at a rate Harley-Davidson could not match. In 1913, they produced more than 32,000 motorcycles, a level that demonstrated not just numerical superiority, but engineering leadership that kept them consistently ahead of competitors. The company's reputation for performance reached new heights in 1911, when Indian achieved what many considered impossible, winning the prestigious Isle of Man Tourist Trophy. The Tourist Trophy was seen as the ultimate test of motorcycle engineering and rider skill, and it had long been dominated by European manufacturers. When Indian swept the top 3 positions with race-modified roadsters, it sent shockwaves through the motorcycle world. American engineering had arrived on the global stage. This racing dominance translated directly into commercial success. Indian's dealer network expanded rapidly, reaching into small towns across America. Their advertisements featured racing victories prominently, with the tagline Indian, the consistent winner, appearing in national magazines. For prospective buyers, the choice seemed obvious. Why buy anything other than the proven champion? The company's engineering department continued pushing boundaries throughout this period. In 1914, the introduction of electric lighting was revolutionary, at a time when most motorcycles still used acetylene lamps. The addition of kickstarters removed the exhausting process of push-starting heavy machines. These were not just conveniences, they made motorcycling accessible to more people, expanding Indian's potential market. But perhaps their most significant achievement came in 1920 with the introduction of the Indian Scout. Charles Franklin, an Irish designer who had joined Indian after competing against them at the Isle of Man, created a motorcycle that would define the brand's reputation for decades. The Scout featured a 600 cubic centimeter V-twin engine in a remarkably balanced frame that handled like nothing else on the market. With its low seat height and responsive controls, the Scout could be mastered by riders of all skill levels, while still offering performance that satisfied experts. It became their best-selling model almost immediately. Hollywood embraced Indian motorcycles during this era, with stars like Steve McQueen becoming devoted owners. When Indian motorcycles appeared in films, they represented freedom and authenticity, qualities the American public increasingly associated with the brand. This cultural penetration extended Indian's influence far beyond those who could afford to purchase their machines. The company's reputation received further validation when they were selected as the official motorcycle for police departments across America. Officers patrolling on Indian motorcycles became a common sight in major cities, providing constant visibility for the brand. When America entered World War I, the military ordered thousands of Indian motorcycles for dispatch riders and reconnaissance units. These were not just sales, they were endorsements of Indians' reliability under the most demanding conditions. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, it sent shockwaves through every American industry, but few were hit harder than motorcycle manufacturers. Motorcycles, unlike automobiles, were still largely considered luxury items rather than essential transportation. As Americans tightened their belts, motorcycle sales plummeted across the board. Indians' response to this crisis revealed the first serious cracks in their corporate foundation. The company had been profitable for so long that they had grown accustomed to steady growth. When faced with rapidly declining sales, management made a series of short-sighted decisions designed to maintain profit margins rather than market position. They raised prices at precisely the moment consumers had less disposable income, creating an opening for competitors offering more affordable options. The Depression also triggered the first of many ownership changes that would plague Indian throughout its remaining years. In 1930, E. Paul DuPont of the DuPont chemical family purchased a controlling interest in the company. While this injection of capital helped Indian survive the worst years of the Depression, it also began a pattern of ownership shuffling that would repeatedly disrupt management continuity. The company's racing program, once the cornerstone of their marketing strategy, suffered from budget cuts. Harley-Davidson, recognizing the promotional value of racing even during economic hardship, maintained their racing investment and began capturing victories that had previously belonged to Indian. The perception of Indian as the performance leader began to erode. Manufacturing inconsistency became increasingly evident during this period. While before the Depression, Indians were known for meticulous quality control, motorcycles produced in the 1930s showed signs of cost-cutting. Chrome plating was thinner, electrical systems less reliable, and quality control more variable. Longtime Indian owners noticed the difference, and dealer complaints increased. World War II should have provided Indian with an opportunity for recovery. Military contracts represented guaranteed sales volume and the chance to demonstrate their machine's durability under extreme conditions. Indian did secure substantial military orders, producing approximately 35,000 motorcycles for Allied forces. However, their military models revealed troubling manufacturing deficiencies. The Model 841, designed specifically for desert warfare, suffered from persistent overheating problems. The Model 30.50, intended for general military use, experienced frequent transmission failures. These quality issues were not just embarrassing, they were dangerous for military personnel relying on these machines in combat zones. The contrast with Harley-Davidson's WLA model, which performed admirably throughout the war, was stark and noticed by military procurement officers. As American soldiers returned home from World War II, motorcycle manufacturers anticipated a sales boom. Veterans who had experienced motorcycles during their service often developed a passion for riding. Disposable income was increasing, and Americans were embracing recreational activities with unprecedented enthusiasm. This should have been Indian's opportunity for renaissance. Instead, the company made what history would judge as their fatal decision. Under new President Ralph B. Rogers, who took control in 1945, Indian completely reimagined their product lineup, abandoning the V-twin engine configuration that had defined American motorcycles for decades, in favor of vertical twin engines inspired by European designs. This decision reflected a fundamental misreading of the American market. While European riders prioritized efficient commuting on crowded streets, American motorcyclists increasingly viewed their machines as recreational vehicles that expressed individuality and freedom. The V-twin engine, with its distinctive appearance and torque characteristics, had become synonymous with the American motorcycling experience. Rogers' strategy was implemented through 4 new models: the Arrow, a 218 cubic centimeter single-cylinder commuter; the Scout, a 440 cubic centimeter vertical twin; the Warrior, a 500 cubic centimeter vertical twin; and the Chief, the sole remaining traditional V-twin. On paper, this diversified lineup addressed multiple market segments. In reality, it represented a catastrophic misallocation of limited resources. The manufacturing challenges of simultaneously developing and producing 4 entirely new models would have strained even a healthy company. For Indian, still recovering from wartime production compromises, it was disastrous. The engineering department was forced to rush development, skipping crucial testing phases. Production lines had to be completely reconfigured, disrupting institutional knowledge about assembly processes. The situation worsened when Rogers made another critical mistake: closing the historic Springfield manufacturing facility that had been Indian's home since 1902. The decision was ostensibly financial. The aging facility required significant investment to modernize. However, this ignored the facility's most valuable asset: the skilled workforce that had built Indian's reputation for craftsmanship. Production was relocated to smaller facilities in Massachusetts and Connecticut, neither of which had the capacity or expertise for motorcycle manufacturing. Experienced workers who could not relocate were replaced by untrained new hires. The institutional knowledge accumulated over 5 decades of motorcycle production, the subtle skills that cannot be documented in assembly manuals, was lost overnight. The results were predictable and immediate. The new models suffered from catastrophic reliability problems. Engines leaked oil profusely. Electrical systems failed unpredictably. Transmissions seized without warning. These were not minor quality issues. They were fundamental engineering failures that rendered the motorcycles essentially unusable. The closure of Indian Motorcycle sent shockwaves through the American motorcycling community. For many riders, especially those who had grown up in the golden era of Indian's dominance, it was almost inconceivable that this iconic brand could simply cease to exist. The immediate aftermath revealed just how deeply this corporate death would impact the industry. Dealers who had committed their businesses to Indian were left in an impossible position. Many had showrooms full of unsold inventory, spare parts inventories that would now never be replenished, and service departments specialized in machines that would gradually disappear from roads. Some dealers had invested their life savings in Indian franchises that were suddenly worthless. The human cost was enormous. Thousands of dealership employees lost their livelihoods almost overnight. The exodus to Harley-Davidson was immediate and comprehensive. Within months of Indian's closure, approximately 80% of former Indian dealers had established relationships with Harley-Davidson, bringing their customer networks and service expertise to the last remaining American motorcycle manufacturer. This represented not just a transfer of business, but a fundamental consolidation of American motorcycling culture around a single brand. For customers, the impact was equally severe. Owners of recent Indian models found themselves with effectively orphaned machines. Warranty coverage became meaningless with no company to honor claims. Replacement parts, already scarce during the company's final struggling years, became unobtainable for all but the most common components. Indian motorcycles, once prized for their durability and longevity, became liabilities. Asset liquidation was particularly destructive to Indian's legacy. Manufacturing equipment that embodied decades of specialized knowledge was sold at auction for pennies on the dollar, often purchased for scrap metal value rather than productive use. Even more devastating was the loss of engineering drawings, production specifications, and testing data that represented Indian's intellectual capital. Without proper archiving, these irreplaceable documents were scattered or destroyed, eliminating any possibility of a faithful production revival. Indian's skilled workforce dispersed across the manufacturing landscape. Engine builders found positions in automotive plants. Frame welders moved to metal fabrication companies. Design engineers transitioned to adjacent industries. With each departing employee went pieces of the tacit knowledge that had made Indian motorcycles special, the thousands of small techniques and insights that are not captured in formal documentation but are essential to manufacturing excellence. The cultural impact extended beyond practical considerations. Indian motorcycles had been integral to American identity during the first half of the 20th century. They had carried soldiers through 2 world wars, served in police departments across the nation, and featured prominently in movies and magazine advertisements. Their disappearance left a void in American transportation culture that foreign manufacturers would eventually fill. Motorcycle racing, once dominated by the rivalry between Indian and Harley-Davidson, lost much of its national prominence. With competition reduced to essentially one American manufacturer, the narrative excitement of domestic competition diminished. European and later Japanese manufacturers would eventually fill this competitive void, but the uniquely American character of motorcycle racing was permanently altered. The decades following Indian's collapse revealed the full extent of what had been lost. Unlike companies that go through bankruptcy, restructuring, or acquisition, Indian experienced complete corporate death. The original entity ceased to exist entirely, with no operational continuity. This distinction would prove critical in understanding why resurrection attempts consistently failed. By 1960, the operational infrastructure that had made Indian successful was completely dismantled. The Springfield factory complex, once a marvel of vertical integration where raw materials entered one end and complete motorcycles emerged from the other, had been repurposed for other industries. The specialized tools and fixtures designed specifically for Indian motorcycle production had been scrapped or repurposed. The supplier network that had provided everything from carburetors to seat leather had established relationships with other manufacturers or gone out of business themselves. More devastating was the loss of human capital. Motorcycle manufacturing requires a complex ecosystem of specialized skills, engine balancing techniques passed from master to apprentice, frame alignment methods developed through decades of experience, and tuning procedures refined through racing competition. When Indian ceased operations, this knowledge was not simply put on hold. It dissipated permanently as workers dispersed to other industries or retired. Unlike documented specifications that can be archived, this tacit knowledge existed only in the hands and minds of Indian's workforce. The first resurrection attempt came in 1963 when entrepreneur Floyd Clymer acquired rights to the Indian name. Clymer's approach was pragmatic. Rather than attempting to recreate original Indian designs, he imported Italian-built motorcycles and branded them as Indians. While these machines were competently engineered, they shared nothing with historic Indian motorcycles beyond the badge. The disconnect was obvious to enthusiasts, and the venture failed after Clymer's death in 1970. A pattern emerged through subsequent revival attempts over the next 3 decades. Each new owner would acquire rights to the Indian name, announce ambitious plans to restore the brand to its former glory, produce a small number of motorcycles, and then collapse under financial pressure. The American Motorcycle Company, from 1974 to 1977, Indian Motorcycle Company of America, from 1977 to 1984, Indian Motorcycle Company of America from 1992 to 2003, each followed essentially the same trajectory toward failure. These revival attempts shared a fundamental misunderstanding of what had been lost. The Indian trademark remained valuable, but a trademark alone does not contain the knowledge of how to build motorcycles that embody a specific brand character. Each new owner discovered that recreating Indian was not simply a matter of designing motorcycles that looked like Indians. It required engineering machines that performed, sounded, and felt like Indians, a much more elusive goal without the institutional knowledge that died with the original company. Meanwhile, the collector market for authentic Indian motorcycles from the pre-extinction era exploded. A 1948 Indian chief that might have sold for $500 in the 1960s commanded $25,000 by the 1980s and over $100,000 by the 2000s. This appreciation reflected growing recognition of what had been lost. These were not just vintage motorcycles, but irreplaceable links to an engineering tradition that no longer existed. With the benefit of historical perspective, the fatal flaws in Indian's collapse become clear. 3 critical mistakes stand out as particularly devastating, each compounding the others to create an irreversible downward spiral. The first fatal mistake was a fundamental strategic misreading of the post-war American motorcycle market. When Ralph Rogers pushed Indian toward lightweight vertical twin engines and away from their traditional V-twin designs, he was not making a minor product line adjustment. He was abandoning the very identity that had built the company. This would be comparable to Coca-Cola abandoning carbonated beverages for fruit juices, or Ford deciding to stop making pickup trucks. The decision reflected a profound misunderstanding of why customers chose Indian motorcycles. American riders after World War II were not looking for practical transportation. Automobiles had become accessible enough to fill that role. They were seeking recreational vehicles that expressed a distinctly American ethos of freedom, power, and individuality. The V-twin engine, with its distinctive sound, appearance, and torque characteristics, had become intrinsically linked to that motorcycling experience. By pivoting to European-inspired designs, Indian alienated their core customer base without successfully attracting new market segments. The second fatal mistake was the destruction of manufacturing continuity through the closure of the Springfield facility. Modern business thinking often treats manufacturing as a commodity function that can be easily relocated or outsourced. Indian's collapse demonstrates why this perspective is dangerously oversimplified. The Springfield factory was not just a building with machinery. It was a living repository of institutional knowledge embodied in its workforce. When production moved to multiple smaller facilities, staffed primarily by inexperienced workers, the tacit knowledge accumulated over 5 decades of motorcycle manufacturing vanished. This knowledge, how metal should sound when properly tempered, how much torque a particular fastener requires, how to diagnose subtle vibration patterns, cannot be documented in manuals. It exists in the experienced hands and minds of a skilled workforce. By dismantling this workforce, Indian destroyed their most valuable asset. The third fatal mistake was prioritizing short-term financial considerations over long-term viability. As quality issues mounted and sales declined, management made increasingly desperate attempts to generate immediate cash flow. Research and development budgets were slashed precisely when innovation was most needed. Quality control was compromised to reduce production costs. Dealer support was curtailed when dealer confidence was most crucial. These decisions created a death spiral. Each cost-cutting measure further damaged product quality and brand reputation, necessitating even more drastic cost-cutting. The contrast with Harley-Davidson during the same period is instructive. Facing identical post-war market conditions, Harley made nearly opposite strategic choices. They doubled down on their V-twin engine configuration rather than abandoning it. They maintained manufacturing continuity at their Milwaukee facility, preserving workforce expertise. When financial pressures mounted, they protected engineering and quality control budgets, even as other departments faced cuts. Harley-Davidson certainly was not immune to challenges. They experienced serious financial difficulties and quality problems, particularly during the AMF ownership period from 1969 to 1981. The critical difference was that Harley survived these challenges, maintaining enough continuity to eventually recover. Indian's complete extinction meant there was no foundation for organic recovery. In 2011, Polaris Industries, a successful manufacturer of snowmobiles, all-terrain vehicles, and side-by-side vehicles, acquired the rights to Indian Motorcycle. With billions in annual revenue and extensive powersports manufacturing experience, Polaris represented the most credible resurrection attempt in Indian's posthumous history. Their approach acknowledged what previous revival efforts had missed. Authentic recreation would require extraordinary engineering resources and patient capital investment. Polaris's strategy was methodical and well-funded. Rather than rushing motorcycles to market, they spent 2 years developing an entirely new platform centered around the Thunderstroke 111 engine, a modern interpretation of the classic Indian V-twin. The engineering team studied vintage Indian motorcycles extensively, attempting to capture their aesthetic and performance characteristics while incorporating modern technology. When the first Polaris-built Indians debuted in 2013, they received generally positive reviews from the motorcycling press. Yet despite this seemingly promising restart, the fundamental challenge of resurrection remained. By 2023, after a decade of Polaris ownership and over $1 billion invested, Indian Motorcycle held just 3% of the American heavyweight motorcycle market. Harley-Davidson, despite facing significant challenges of their own, still commanded over 50% market share in the same segment. Financial analysts estimated that Indian Motorcycle had yet to achieve consistent profitability despite substantial corporate backing. Quality issues reminiscent of previous revival attempts have surfaced repeatedly. The 2015 Indian Scout experienced widespread engine overheating problems. The 2017 to 2018 models faced multiple recalls for brake failures and fuel system leaks. The 2020 Challenger model's frame cracking issues echoed quality problems from the company's final original years. While modern manufacturing processes have prevented these issues from being catastrophic, they reflect the persistent challenge of building motorcycles worthy of the Indian name without the institutional knowledge that developed it. The marketing contradiction at the heart of the current Indian motorcycle operation is impossible to ignore. Advertising materials prominently feature claims like America's first motorcycle company and references to 120 years of heritage. These statements, while technically referring to the trademark's age, create a misleading impression of continuity. The original Indian Motorcycle Company died completely in 1953. The current operation shares nothing with it beyond the name: no personnel, no manufacturing techniques, no engineering lineage, no corporate DNA. The story of Indian Motorcycle forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Are some business deaths permanent regardless of the fame of their names? The evidence suggests the answer is yes. Despite billions invested across multiple revival attempts spanning 7 decades, the new Indian motorcycles remain shadows of the originals, competently executed tributes rather than authentic continuations. In a world where Harley-Davidson dominates American motorcycle culture, can Indian ever truly return from extinction? History suggests it cannot, at least not as the same entity that once rivaled Harley. What exists today is a new company using an old name, building new interpretations of historic designs without the institutional knowledge that created them. This distinction matters beyond motorcycling. We live in an era where brand names are bought, sold, and revived with increasing frequency. Understanding the difference between authentic continuity and marketed nostalgia helps us make more informed choices about the products we purchase and the stories we believe. What do you think? Is there a fundamental difference between companies that evolve through difficult times and those that die completely before being resurrected? Can any amount of money and expertise truly bring back what has been lost when institutional knowledge disappears? Share your thoughts in the comments below.